These stories are first-hand accounts shared by Reddit users, detailing unsettling real-life encounters that left lasting impressions. Each narrative provides a chilling glimpse into moments of danger, survival, and eerie coincidences that might make you rethink your surroundings. Disclaimer: these accounts were originally published by Reddit users and are presented as personal experiences. While they are described as true events, their accuracy relies on the original storytellers. The details shared here are intended for awareness and cautionary purposes only. Viewer discretion is advised. Story 1. The Eggman. I thought I would share my experience with the Eggman. For some context, my boyfriend, who I'll refer to as M, and I are both 19-year-old students living in a medium-sized city. A couple months ago, we were walking to M's flat after hanging out with some friends at around 2 a.m. There was no one else on the streets. When we left, we heard a strange musical sound accompanying the wind. It sounded like someone playing a lute. Now, as a woman walking at night, I naturally get quite creeped out by a lot of things which mostly end up being unreasonable, and M doesn't get scared often. So when M also got freaked out by the lute, that's when I knew something was up. Shortly after, a bus whooshed past, stirring up all the litter around it. Seeing buses flying past is not an unusual sight for us. However, this eerily empty bus unsettled us. By this point, I was feeling on edge and eager to get home. We were walking beside a big wall when I saw him across the road. The Eggman, a large black figure, an egg-shaped head, tall and wide, a long dark jacket. No identifiable features other than his bald eggy head. He was walking on the other side of the road from us. I felt creeped out the moment I saw him from his appearance alone. I made a joke to M about him, probably as a way to disguise my fear. I remember feeling dread and just wanting to walk past him, so I knew he wasn't a threat. We approached a passageway which connected the street we were on to another. Suddenly, the Eggman snapped in our direction and started speed walking across the road towards us. The way he turned was so unnatural, he didn't even pause or show any sign of noticing us. He just instantly turned and made his way toward us. My heart sank as me and M sped walked to the passageway. I've never felt such a gut instinct telling me to run before then, so we did just that and ran all the way to the top. We could hear shouting as we ran, and M was afraid he was shouting for someone at the top of the passage to get us. I didn't dare turn around until we were at the top, and by then he was gone. M later told me that he had turned around and saw the Eggman at the bottom of the passage just standing still staring at us. Luckily, we both made it to the safety of the flat. The thing which creeps me out the most is how inhuman it all felt. From the creepy ambience before warning sings, to the unnatural movement of the Eggman. It terrifies me that even in the street light, neither M nor I could identify a single feature on his face. All he was to us was a big black shadowy shape. Was he just some drunk/high dude trying to intimidate us or rob us? Was he trying to cause us genuine harm? I'm glad we didn't stick around to find out. So to the Eggman, let's not meet, unless you're bringing bacon, man. Story 2. Strange encounter in the woods. This happened today and I just can't get it out of my head, which is why I decided to share this to you guys. By the way, please excuse mistakes in my grammar. English is not my first language. I'm currently visiting my grandma and she lives in a small town with just a couple hundred people in it. I do small hikes daily here. We used to do them together, but because of the sunny weather today, she decided to stay home. Everything was going as usual and I decided to do a small hike along this little path through the woods that my grandma had recommended to me. I also like to use these short moments of alone time to smoke a little, while enjoying the landscape, so I did smoke a little. After about 1:30 of walking, something happened. I saw a man about 60 meters away from me walking in my direction. Note, this is not a very popular hiking trail, so it is actually quite rare to see somebody else, especially with these weather conditions. Everything still seemed normal at this point. As he came closer, I noticed him really staring at me as I awkwardly broke and re-entered eye contact. The closer he came, the more tense I felt. I have to add, I'm a man and can definitely defend myself, and I met a few other people on this path before, where everything was and felt completely normal. This one was different. As I walked past him, I noticed a strange grin on his face. He had really bad teeth and was quite tall, and he walked in a way that really unsettled me. It was kind of awkward, and I decided to break the silence and said, "Hello." He didn't answer right away, but I could hear a very silent mumbling as he passed me. I don't really know how to describe this, but I felt like something was just off about him. I could just tell. I felt him looking at me after we were about 10 meters away from each other, so I turned around and I absolutely catched him staring at me and not even walking, just standing there. He quickly turned around as if he didn't want me to notice that he was still watching. Remember, I smoked a J about 20 minutes earlier, so this all really freaked me out. I tried to put it aside as paranoia from the weed. After about 20 minutes of following the trail, I noticed that I was walking into a dead end, because I previously took a wrong turn, so I had to turn around, the exact way that strange man from earlier went. I decided to pull myself together and distract myself with some music as I headed back. But I just couldn't get that previous encounter and the fact that I had to go in his direction again out of my head. I kept walking for about 40 minutes. At this point, I thought to myself that the chances of meeting him again were slim and that I should just focus on getting home, as I began feeling very tired from the constant sun. I also had this thought, no one would ever find me here, which is a very scary concept in my opinion. I was making progress, but then I saw someone sitting on a small bench right next to the path. It was him. I felt like I was in a goddamn horror movie. Thoughts rushed through my head. Did he wait for me? Did he know about the dead end and knew that I will have to head back? I was kind of panicking but decided to keep my cool. The bench was placed in a way that he could not see me yet, but would have a perfect look at me facing my back when I would walk past him. As I came closer, my heart began to beat in a way it didn't in years. The kind like you just ran a marathon and came through the finish line. I was freaking out. As I came closer, he noticed me and began looking at me over his shoulder, and there it was again. That same grin he gave me earlier. I had goosebumps. I kept walking at a normal pace and didn't go a second without looking behind me as I walked past. He kept staring in a strange way. He was just so creepy, and I had this fear that he would suddenly get up and chase me. After he kept looking right into my soul, I started slowly jogging, which turned into a sprint. I ran as quickly as I could until I could not see him anymore. Going home, I could not get all this out of my head. This really startled me. Please don't write this off as misjudgment because I smoked weed earlier. This was real. There was something not right with him. I could just sense it. I have never felt this way about anyone I've ever met. This is a real story, and I will not forget this encounter anytime soon. Somehow I can't brush off this thought that maybe I was really lucky today. Story 3. Bald guy, let's not meet again, please. A few years ago, I was a university student renting a house with 3 friends on a quiet street in what's considered one of the safer, more privileged cities in the UK. I'd never heard of anything strange happening in the area. To help pay for tuition and rent, which was expensive, I worked late evening shifts at an Asda which closed at midnight. My shift usually ended around 12:30 or 1 a.m., so I'd often cycle home at weird hours. But nothing ever happened. My housemates, who I met through uni, were a year ahead of me, graduated and already busy with work. By the time I'd get home, they'd usually be asleep. So the house was quiet when I got back. One winter night, after a long shift, I was cycling home in the freezing cold. I was exhausted and moving slowly, which probably made me pretty quiet on the road. As I turned into the street where our house was, we lived at the far end. I noticed someone standing directly in front of our door. It wasn't one of my housemates. This guy was bald, and none of the people I lived with were. He was just standing there, just still, facing the door, not knocking, not moving, not talking, just staring straight ahead. Our door did not have anything, no glass, no peephole, nothing. I slowed down and instinctively turned around before he could notice me. Something about it felt off. I circled a few nearby streets, trying to think of what to do. I was too scared to go back, so I started calling my housemates, but no answer. Texted a few friends too, hoping someone might still be awake. But nothing. I could see my breath in the cold, and my fingers were freezing around the handle of the bike. I kept cycling in better lit areas where there were still the occasional cars driving by. Being near movement felt safer. Eventually, I calmed down a bit, but I was drained. I'd worked 12 hours, it was nearly 3 a.m. My phone battery was low, and I just wanted to go home. So I cycled back and turned into the street again. He was still there. Same position. Just staring at the door. I turned around and went back to the main road. By now, it was even quieter. That's when I had a full-blown panic attack. I didn't know what to do anymore, and for some reason, don't ask me why, I never called the police. I really don't know why. I think I just froze. Eventually, one of the friends I'd messaged earlier replied. They were still up, and I asked if I could come to theirs. Thankfully, they said yes. It took a while to get there, but I finally made it by 4 a.m. I was beyond tired, but safe. I guess he eventually left, as the morning after, none of my housemates noticed anything. To the bald guy staring at my door in the middle of the night. Let's not meet again. Story 4. Man asked to take before photos. This happened in August of 2013. I was visiting Montreal for their Diversite weekend, which was basically like Pride but took place the long weekend before the official Montreal Pride. My best friend at the time had met a guy at Toronto Pride a month earlier, and he invited both of us to come there so my friend wouldn't be uncomfortable going to spend the weekend with someone he didn't know well. We arrived on Thursday and the trip was going great. We went out the first night, walked the streets that were closed off to cars the next day, and our host made us a nice dinner, and then we went out again Friday night. Just a quick note before I get into what happened. I partied quite a bit with drugs at this time, and I also in the past had a tendency to lose my cell phone, so for about a year prior I stopped taking my cell phone whenever I went out. So that Friday night we went out to a club, Parking, which sadly has since closed. And it was another fun night, the music was great and the tequila shots were incredibly cheap. I was dancing and moving all around the club but would circle back and check in with my friend and our host, and I would also run into people that I knew who were also visiting from Toronto and ended up taking some MDMA from one of them. Danced some more until I was completely soaked in sweat, so I went to the bathroom to wipe myself down and pee. When I got into the bathroom, there was someone leaving, but it looked like I was the only one in there. I went and used the stall because I have a hard time using the urinal, and once I came out I was quite surprised to see a man in the corner of the washroom smiling at me. He looked to be in his mid-30s, on the shorter side and a bit chubby. He was wearing a polo shirt and jeans and had glasses, and I remember thinking when I saw he reminded me of an accountant, not sure why that thought popped in my head. I was pretty sure I didn't hear the door, but I couldn't be sure, so I just smiled back and said hello as I went to wash my hands. Hello, he responded. Are you having fun tonight? I replied I was, and that the music was incredible, and was wiping myself down with paper towels and my shirt. Do you want to have some Coke with me? He asked. Now this was not the first time I had been offered Coke in a bathroom at a nightclub, and had done this in the past and ended up having some good experiences and met some interesting people, so I was already high and drunk, and not thinking much of it I said, sure, I would love to, thanks. I just live right near here. It's at my place if you don't mind coming over. We can do some lines and have a drink then walk back to the club. He replied. Now obviously looking back I realize how very dumb my following actions were, and I can't imagine myself being so stupid and careless now, but without thinking about it I agreed and I left with him. The club allowed you to re-enter if you had a wristband. We chatted on the walk over to his place. He asked me where I was from because I didn't seem like I was from Montreal, and what parties I had gone to and how old I was and my name. I asked his name, but he instead responded that we had arrived. The whole wall felt like 5 minutes, but I honestly hadn't been paying much attention to where we were walking. His apartment was in this building that had 3 floors, and his unit was on the 2nd floor, and you had to climb this long narrow metal staircase, and his door seemed to be in the middle of 2 other apartments on either side. He unlocked the door and let me in first, flicked on the lights, and told me to make myself comfortable. I was walking and noticed he had carpet, so I turned around to ask him if I should take my shoes off when I noticed that he was locking the door from the inside with a key above the regular lock, and in that moment I was overwhelmed with a feeling of dread like I had never felt before. The danger I had possibly put myself in another city, no phone, nobody knows where I am, and now seeing this person locking their door from inside with a key. I just thought to myself, I'll pretend I didn't see that. I won't take off my shoes and politely hang out for a few minutes, then ask to head back. I also thought I could be having an extreme overreaction to what I saw because I was high, but as I looked around everything inside of me was just screaming, you need to get out of here. I went and sat on the arm of the couch. He said I should take off my shoes and relax. I was getting a better look at him now in the lights of his apartment. He still looked plain and unassuming, but his eyes looked shifty, and he pulled down both of the shades on the windows that were on each side of the door. I told him that I was okay and I was eager to get back to dancing, so he said he would make us drinks, then we could go back. The apartment looked much bigger inside than it did from the street. It was an open layout with the living room beside the kitchen, and then a hallway in the middle with closed doors painted black, and I could hear music coming from one of the doors. I asked him if someone else was there as he came from the kitchen with a glass, and he replied no. As he handed me my glass, he looked me up and down. I wasn't wearing a shirt. He said with this increasingly creepy smile spreading across his face, "You have a very beautiful body, especially your chest. Would you mind if I took some photos of you before we went back?" Every alarm bell is going off in my head now, and all I can think about is Jeffrey Dahmer and all his Polaroids, and what am I going to do because that was such a creepy thing to say, and all I can manage is a polite laugh as I take the drink and say sure. "Excellent," he says. He then tells me to take off my shoes, and he is going to get the Coke and his camera and to finish my drink. He walks down the hall, takes out his keys and unlocks the second door and opens the door enough to slip in and closes it behind him. The second that door was closed, I jumped up, ran over to the sink and dumped my drink, put my shirt on, it had been tied around the belt loop of my shorts, and ran to the front door. I was able to turn and unlock the regular lock, but the door would not budge. I kept turning and pulling, but nothing. Then I heard from behind me, "What are you doing?" I turned around and he was standing at the base of the hallway with one of those professional cameras slung around his neck and holding a square mirror with a pile of white powder on it. I thanked him for the drink while gesturing to my empty glass, but that it was getting late and I wanted to get back, but we could exchange numbers and maybe meet up tomorrow. His demeanor slightly changed. He was still smiling, but his tone when he next spoke sounded irritated. He asked me if I was nervous about taking the photos and I should just wait for my drink to relax me, and I said no, that I wanted to go. This exchange of him telling me to stay and me saying no went back and forth for about a minute when he suddenly glared at me, put down the mirror, pointed at the couch and said, "Sit down now." Not knowing what to do or how I was going to get out of this, I remembered that there were other units on each side of us and it had to be around 2:30 in the morning at this point, so I just started screaming at the top of my lungs like a madman, banging on the door, the window, the wall. "Shoo! Shut up! Be quiet!" He snapped at me as he ran to the door. He quickly unlocked and told me to get out and stepped aside. I bolted out that door and down the stairs, skipping the bottom steps, and hopped over the side of the railing. I looked up behind when I landed and he wasn't there, but I heard a door slam and took off running down the street. I hadn't paid attention on the walk there, so I didn't know which way to walk, but I knew it was close, and luckily I was able to wave down a passing taxi and take it back to the bar. When I got back to the bar, I found my friend in the same spot dancing. The whole incident must have been less than half an hour. I was too embarrassed about how stupid I had been, and being back in the club, I started to feel bad that I had just freaked out on this nice man, so I didn't say anything, but I stayed by his side until we left shortly after I got back. The entire thing felt quite surreal, and I remember the next day when I did tell my friend, kind of laughing it off and joking about getting murdered and trying to make light of it because it was so scary, and it wasn't until years later after joining Reddit and the sub and reading other stories that I started to think about that night more and more and realized how much potential danger I put myself in. So strange man from the bathroom that lured me to his place and wanted to take before photos of me. Let's not meet ever again. Story 5. A man hides in a gas station office. I haven't shared this story with many people. I, 23F, worked at a gas station for just over 3 years some time ago. At the time of this story, I would have been no older than 18. I lived in a heavily suburban area in the deep south that wasn't witness to anything too insane. So many businesses didn't take many safety precautions beyond what our training instructed us on, i.e. don't fight a robber, give them what they want, etc., etc. My manager, Sophia, never scheduled women for overnight shifts. It was always our male staff. However, I had offered one night to stay later for the extra bit of money, and seeing as I lived a 5-minute walk away, didn't see the harm in staying later. One thing I feel I need to mention is that it gets incredibly dark in the south at night and the sun sets quickly. My area also had little to no street lights. So, my shift started as normal. I manned the register, swept, restocked what I could, and kept things tidy for the most part. But a girl can only mop so many times before there's nothing left to do. So I spent a lot of my time at the register waiting for customers and screwing off on my phone to pass the time when a customer comes in. I call out my standard greeting as I look up to find a tall, disheveled man standing at my register. Obviously, I immediately disregard my phone to help him out, but I notice he's acting odd. At the time, I had chalked it up to my imagination, but my gut told me otherwise. He asks where the restroom was, and I point him in the direction. Now, to get to the bathroom you have to walk past the registers and into a small hall where our office and stockroom also was. He goes and I continue on as normal, completely forgetting about him. A regular of mine walks in, a taller man who had served in the Marines for 22 years, and we get to talking when I hear something fall over in the back, like a broom or mop or something. My regular asks me if I'm working alone and if I want him to take a look around. I declined the offer as I didn't want to get in trouble with my boss for letting a customer into employee-only areas. He stays his goodbyes and lets me know that he'll be back by later for lotto tickets. Some more time passes and I have to pee after drinking endless Powerade from the soda machine. I go to make my way back, and before I could reach the bathroom I glance to the office and notice the door is way more open than I left it. I don't know what compelled me to push the door in with my foot, but that's what I did. I kicked the door so it'd swing open and trigger the motion sensor light. The light comes on and I don't see anything until I spot the odd bathroom guy standing stock still behind the door. We made eye contact as I immediately backed up and out of the hall. The man emerges from the office only seconds later and just casually strolls out, keeping his eyes on me the entire way out until I couldn't see him anymore. I called my boss immediately to tell her and she called the police. Apparently, that man had been banned from every single other store in the area for the same thing, but never faced charges as he hadn't committed a crime yet. He continued to show up every day at random hours to just stare at me over the aisles without ever buying anything. I'm not sure what his intentions were or why he hid, but something about the way he stood so still long enough for the motion light to turn off doesn't sit well with me. Creepy man from the gas station. Let's never meet again. Story 6. A man tried to lure me to a place that didn't exist. When I was around 25 years old, I was working at a tiny restaurant that served desserts. It was a pretty hidden and quiet location, so I was there alone in the mornings. On one occasion, a man walked in and I recognized him from the night before. He had been there with his wife and grown children. The only other time I had ever seen him. This time he was alone and began talking to me. Everything seemed like the typical small talk, but he kept commenting that I looked 19 and saying he could help me, that he could get me into his job that paid $7 more than what I was making at the time. I was intrigued at first, so I asked for the name of the company, getting excited, but he would just keep talking and not give it to me. He then began talking about how he has affairs and that his wife knows and is okay with it, mentioning that he had an affair with someone once who was 19, and that now she was happily married and that till that day she thanks him for all he taught her. At this point I'm getting creeped out, but he wouldn't stop talking. This one car drove by in this solitary area and they'd wave at him through the glass doors, and he kept telling me how he knew so many people. It all felt very shady. He wouldn't stop pestering me about this job, telling me that I should apply but not giving me a name. He would tell me the overall area of where it was at, which was by the outskirts of the city, but avoid the name. Kept telling me to follow him after work so that he could get me in, probably hired on the spot. I told him my car was getting fixed so my sister would be picking me up anyway, so I couldn't, but since he wouldn't take no for an answer, I eventually decided to tell him I would just so he could leave. But as soon as I did, he changed the goal and now he was telling me to just go in his car with him, that way they'd see me arrive with him and would hire me right away. In between all this, he randomly shows me a white paper that was supposedly his license to carry. Very random. He also finally gives me the name of the company. Eventually I told him I would and to come back at the time I'd be off, just so that he would leave. I went to the back and looked up the name of the supposed job and there was nothing. I used Google Maps to search the area he mentioned and nope, not a factory, not anything. Once my time to leave arrived, my sister picked me up from the side of the building, and as we drove away he had indeed come back and was parked near the location, around the corner. Never saw him again. Was recently retelling this story to a friend of mine and deeply regretting not reporting this. I had an issue with dissociation due to past life experiences. And although I was 25, I was much more naive than when I was 25. You never know what people are about, especially with him showing me his license to carry. I hope that by not reporting it, I didn't get anyone else hurt. Story 7. He insisted I held his hand. When I was 8, I lived on a very small cul-de-sac on a lake. It was the fall, and the lake was made up of mostly seasonal houses, so my street and a few others were the only ones with year-round residents. Due to this, everyone knew everyone and you could always identify who was who simply based on the car they drove. I had just gotten off the bus from school and threw my backpack in my front yard and started playing some basketball. Our basketball hoop was in the street, so if a car came by or something, you'd have to stop playing so they could get through. My older siblings were off at their clubs, so the only other person home was my mom, evidently by her car in the driveway. I know she knew I was home because she looked at me in the driveway, smiled, and turned around to go back to her laptop to work. After playing for a bit, a car turned down my street who I didn't recognize. This was weird for a few reasons. 1. My street was made up of people who didn't like visitors. 2. It was midday, everyone on my street was working. And 3. Their plates were from another state. While I recognized it was weird, I thought nothing of it and moved so they could drive down the street. After all, sometimes people just like seeing the lake in the off-season and need somewhere to turn around. My house was the first one on the street, so I figured in a minute I'd see him turn back up around to leave. And I was right, he came back around, but he stopped. I was standing across the street from my house and the basketball hoop when he rolled down his window. "Hey kid, let me see the ball." I handed him the ball and he tried to shoot it over his car into the basket. "Damn, I missed it. Go get it and let me try again." I remember thinking he was cool. He was probably early 30s and very charismatic. Despite it being fall, he was dressed like it was summer, like he was going to a frat house for a party. When I went to retrieve the ball, I bent over and grabbed it from the ground and I heard a camera. He had obviously taken a picture of me. Even at 8, some alarm bells started going off, but they were dismissed because of how the guy looked. I went back around the car and handed him the ball, except this time he grabbed my wrist. The ball fell and he was just staring at me, his grip getting tighter and tighter. He then took his other hand and started to try and interlock his fingers with him. "Just let it happen, kid. Enjoy this. And don't even think about screaming for help. Nobody will hear you." I was confused because my mom would have heard me. She was working from home and could be outside in seconds. I resisted him holding my hand for what felt like minutes when he slowly started to put his foot on the gas. I was forced to kind of side sprint and he got what he wanted. He was holding my hand. It was obvious he was filled with excitement and pleasure from holding my hand. His eyes rolled back. He pressed his legs together. His tongue was out. It was disturbing. I thought to myself that I can either scream and hopefully live or stay silent and probably die, so I screamed for my mom. He said, "Oh shit," and let go and sped off. The roads are tight where I lived, and I remember when he was turning off my road to the main road, he ran over a patch of the lawn across the street, probably going 40 miles per hour on this 10 mph road. My mom came running out and saw him taking off, trying to get his plate, but couldn't. I explained to her inside what happened, and then my dad later when he came home from work. My dad was a volunteer EMT on the weekends for the town, so he knew a lot of the police and told them what happened. They said they didn't get any other reports from the town, and checked up with surrounding towns to see if they had anything, and there was nothing. My mom told my dad that she had seen an unfamiliar car going up and down the road lately, but thought nothing of it. We concluded he was probably scouting the area, as it was obvious our house had children in it, and the other houses were not occupied midday. He probably thought my mom's car was stationary because it was old, beat up, and hardly used with her working from home. We thought that was it, but something weird happened that night. While my siblings should have typically been home, it was a Friday night and they wanted to stay at friends' houses. My parents were quicker to approve this than usual because they thought the less children at home, the less that would be at risk. Since they were older and this predates the always online era, they would have wanted to be outside late, and they probably didn't want to listen to the whining that would ensue when my parents said they couldn't. With the police and my parents aware of what the guy looked like, we settled down for the night. Our house is a single story and I shared a room with my brothers, with my parents' room at the end of the hallway. With my brothers out and me spooked, my parents closed my curtains and set up the TV from the living room in my room so I had something to distract me and light up the room. It was probably 1 a.m. I was still watching King of the Hill on Adult Swim. My parents didn't know the Cartoon Network wasn't on all day. I was facing away from my window because the TV was across from it when behind me I heard knocking on the window. I froze for a second and thought maybe it was one of my siblings trying to get into the house. They'd sneak out to smoke and would knock on the window sometimes for me to unlock the front door. I didn't want to take a chance with me being spooked, and with it being the weekend, I didn't really care for waking up my parents because my sibling wouldn't get in trouble, and it was better safe than sorry. So I got up and turned on every light I could on the way to my parents' room, including my parents. It woke my mom up, but not my dad. She asked me what was wrong and I told her. She was having a hard time adjusting to the light from waking up, so I turned it off. My parents had 3 windows in their room, one facing the front yard, one facing the side yard, and one facing the backyard. The side yard and backyard have some thick woods behind them that separate us from our next-door neighbor. The backyard window also had our basement door going to it. It was slanted up so when standing at the top of it you could see into their window. In the fall and winter, they wouldn't close that curtain because they didn't worry about anyone doing that. They only would in the summer and spring because sometimes the seasonal house kid residents would shine flashlights into people's windows to wake them up as pranks. When explaining to my mom I had knocked on the window, she got up and as she walked towards me, there he was looking into the window. She screamed, which woke my dad up. The man outside yelled out, "I just wanted to hold his hand." My dad grabbed the signed baseball bat he kept in his room and stormed outside in nothing but his underwear. He was gone. My mom was watching outside the window and said he ran into the woods. These woods weren't known for any big animals, so he was unfortunately safe. We called the police, and after that night we got some basic home security systems. Everyone on my street knew what happened, and my parents invested into more indoor stuff for me and my siblings to do, which is how I got my first Xbox. Nothing ever happened again. Nothing like that happened anywhere near us. All I could assume was the man went back to the state that the license plate on his car was from. Story 8. The scariest experience of my life. Before I tell my story, I just want to say I'm aware of how dumb it is to do stuff like this, and I probably won't be doing this for a long time after what happened a few months ago. Anyway, I just really needed to post this because I don't know who else to tell. About half a year ago, I had the scariest experience of my life. For context, I'm a dumb teenage boy who sneaks out every now and then just to walk around at night. I find something very peaceful walking around after dark, but my parents have never let me stay out past sunset. So for about a year, whenever school gets hard or just life in general gets stressful, I sneak out and just walk around for about 2 hours or so. Anyway, the night I'm talking about began with me deciding to go for another 2 a.m. ritual. I grabbed a sweatshirt, got on my shoes once I was outside, and hopped the fence to freedom. After I was safely away from my neighborhood, I took one of my usual routes, which is cutting through another neighborhood and walking onto a winding road, where I then walk down the middle of it and head towards a circle of shops and fast food restaurants. I was probably there for a solid chunk of time, just walking in the loop and ending up sitting on a bench. At some point, I picked up a plastic spoon on the ground and started to grind it against the pavement until the spoon part was half gone out of boredom. This is important later. I was chillin' there for a bit before I decided to walk around a bit more, and I eventually ended up at a park like 10 minutes away from my neighborhood where I usually end off the night just staring off into the sky. The park itself creeps me out sometimes because at night there's a huge ring of trees surrounding all sides of you and anyone could watch from the woods. Anyway, shit starts to get real here because I'm staring up into existence feeling like a philosopher while I'm laying on one of those table benches when I hear an old man whistle. I probably shot up because I had never had another human interaction on these walks, and I see this old man dimly illuminated by a streetlight by the only entrance of the park. I had seen him before. He's this tall, skinny white guy that walks around our town all day, and I would honestly think he was homeless if he wasn't wearing the same fancy button-up and cargo pants every day. Me and my mom have talked about him, and we think he's mentally disabled and probably lives with a caretaker. I had an interaction with him once. About a year ago, I was walking home in broad daylight when I passed the man who was at that time sitting on a bench. Dude just looks at me and says, "Jesus loves you," with a weird little smirk on his face. I responded with an awkward, "I know," even though I'm an atheist and didn't really think much of it. Anyway, back to the park at night, I just stare at him in that empty parking lot probably way longer than I should have because he was already creeping me the hell out. I imagine we were staring at each other for a real long time before he slowly starts walking toward me, and at this point I'm frozen in fear because why the fuck is this old white geezer out with me at like 3 a.m. in an empty park? I'm standing up at this point when he gets close to me and just gives me this cheeky grin like he knows something I don't yet, and I'm still just gawking at him like a fucking buffoon. Have you ever scoffed at a book or movie when the main character is frozen in fear? Well, I have. And I never will again because at this point I'm more frozen than I've ever been in my life. At some point after probably like 10 seconds of awkward standing, he just kinda half pats and half grabs my shoulder and reaches into his pocket to pull out a plastic spoon. The same plastic spoon that I was holding about an hour ago at the shop plaza. He just kinda tucks it in my front sweatshirt pocket and something just makes my mind snap out of my frozen stance because I absolutely fucking book it to the public bathroom and lock the door. I'm now in this dimly lit bathroom in the middle of the night and I'm guessing at this time it was past 3 in the morning. I assumed that maybe he would leave once he saw me in my state of panic, but honestly I don't think he ever left. I ended up looking closer at the plastic spoon and it was altered. Have you seen that one viral AI-generated image where it looks completely normal at a glance but you can't identify a single thing? If not, just search up, name one thing in this image. Now imagine that except a word carved onto a plastic spoon but you can't read it or even identify any of the letters. I think I sat in that locked bathroom for over half an hour just contemplating every single decision I've made in the past year that led up to the nightmare I was in at that moment. To be clear, I had no phone or any way of contacting someone because my parents installed Life 360 on my phone, and they can see my location whenever. I also had no watch or access to the outside to tell the time. I ended up gaining the courage to unlock the door and just absolutely rocket myself towards the exit of the park. Before I turned the corner, I looked back for a second and saw a figure sitting on the bench that was right next to the bathroom. This senile old man had waited outside for an hour just to see me one more time. I'm being completely honest when I say I held a full sprint until I got to my neighborhood, where I caught my breath behind a bush and then snuck back into my house. I haven't gone out at night since that experience and I don't know if I'll ever sneak out again. I still have the spoon buried somewhere in my wardrobe, but I haven't looked at it in months. Sometimes I think about how long he was following me and if it was an isolated incident, or if he had been stalking me on other late-night trips. I would love to hear your guys' opinion on the matter unless you're here to lecture me about my actions because trust me, I've already learned. Anyway, creepy old man that was stalking me that night, let's not meet again. Story 9. The new neighbors on my street and the lights in the window. I live alone in a little house in a big city. Kind of a rough-around-the-edges neighborhood, but I've lived in the area most of my life, and my block is tight-knit, in spite of half of it being vacant or abandoned. It's also a city that, like many others, tragically has a lot of folks living out of cars and RVs trying to eke out an existence. So I shouldn't have been too surprised when, back in October last year, I got a text from a neighbor. You might want to take a look out your back window. About 10 feet away was an enormous 40-foot motorhome in the dead-end alley, sitting right on the edge of the small cliff that is my unfenced backyard. Having lived in urban areas my whole life, I'm no stranger to odd happenings immediately outside my window, but this did feel a little more intrusive than living in a ground-floor apartment, no thanks to my back window being my bathroom window. It sat there for a few weeks without anyone paying much mind. A few neighbors speculated it might have been someone working on a couple demolition and construction projects in the neighborhood. A supervisor from out of town, perhaps. Whomever it was, I didn't really mind as long as there wasn't any mess, though I was slightly worried a wrong move would end with someone, or the whole vehicle, rolling off the retaining wall and potentially crashing through my wall. Of course, there was the small fact that half the block now couldn't access the alley. My city is very particular about removing vehicles if someone is potentially living in them, and after a few roundabout calls to the parking department, I and my neighbors were told we needed some evidence it was a hazard or abandoned. So I grabbed a cheap webcam off Amazon and popped it in my window, and then went on with my life. About a week later, after some friends over for dinner had left, I thought I'd check and see if the camera had picked up anything. I didn't sleep for the next few nights. Like clockwork, every night around midnight, the lights in the RV would flick on in the otherwise pitch-black night. A couple of cars would pull up behind, and the occupants would unload several very full garbage bags into the RV. Then these shadowy figures would creep down the yard of the vacant house next door, into mine, and methodically circle my house, shining flashlights in each window. Cars would come and go all night until about 5 a.m. Then all was business as usual during daylight hours. Worth mentioning that my house is essentially a studio apartment on top of a garage, built into a slope. My bed is about 10 feet from those windows. Also worth mentioning, my neighborhood had an alarming rash of about 20 armed home invasions the summer before, or the arson on an occupied house across the street a few months earlier. Vulnerable was an understatement of how I felt. I ended up moving most of my furniture around my bed as a makeshift barricade. I called 911. They were a bit incredulous. Nothing was actively happening as I called. This wasn't an emergency. I can call the non-emergency line in the morning if I want to speak to an officer or detective. The next morning, I felt it was prudent to bring in any yard tools that would make a tempting window breaker and double-check the back porch and security flood had working bulbs. And just my luck, I managed to completely break both fixtures in the process. Almost immediately as I walked out my back door, the RV's door swung open, and a man and woman stepped out. They were dressed in t-shirts and shorts despite the 39 degrees weather, and looked a bit like zombies. I waved. They didn't. They stared past me. I quickly retreated back inside to keep an eye remotely, but not before noticing something even more startling. The RV had about 6 security cameras mounted on it, 3 of which were trained on my back door. I was watching them. They were watching me. After a day or two more of this, I had become fully nocturnal, leaving all the lights blazing all night, and I started to feel like I was losing my mind. This was both mostly benign and deeply unsettling. Texting friends and family in hopes of reassurance, well, didn't do much. They're probably just trying to find a quiet place away from the encampments. Maybe they work a night shift. If you were living on the streets, wouldn't you want a security camera? You have one in your house. Okay, maybe I was being paranoid. My neighbors were mostly preoccupied with the alley being blocked and subsequent missed deliveries. And it's not like the city was going to do much anyway. The cars kept coming and going all night. The people with flashlights stayed just outside the edge of my yard, but I'd catch the occasional flash through the window. After being reluctant to leave the house and my cat alone, I had to leave for an in-person work meeting. While I was gone, my camera pinged me about activity. The RV folks had set up stakes around my property and were wrapping yellow caution tape around my yard, across the alley, and setting up a barricade of traffic cones around their vehicle. This was just getting weird. By this point, a few of us on the block started a group text to keep tabs on things. One neighbor a few houses down caught the female half of this duo in her backyard with a chainsaw, climbing their oak tree in broad daylight. They confronted her and she gave the same treatment as me. A mute, 1,000-yard stare. That neighbor called it in, and I watched a few officers poke around for a minute, clearly puzzled by the barricades and tape. I thought there might be some imminent resolution. They then booked it back to their squad and took off with lights and sirens. There was a shooting a few blocks over. I assume they got called to. Another night goes by, punctuated by the RV's alarm going off every couple hours and the engine revving menacingly. Though nothing out of the ordinary, at least this ordinary. I take my mid-morning nap I've become accustomed to over the past week, only to be woken by loud, angry yelling. I pull up the camera feed. Out back is another neighbor, the goofy dad come ex-naval officer, venting his frustrations to a police officer, who's banging the RV door with a baton demanding the occupants come out. There's a brand new sports car parked behind, one that I'd barely made out on my cheap camera's night vision. I carefully left out the front so as not to be conspicuous and circled up the mouth of the alley to speak with the officer, and explained my story in a near stream of consciousness ramble. Did you see them leave? Nope. I played back the camera. The sports car showed up around 5:30 a.m. and nobody had left since. He said the car was too new to have a current registration, and the RV was registered to a deceased person 4 counties away. Suspicious, but nothing outright criminal, but he'd ticket them with a 24-hour tow notice. As he was typing up the ticket, the sports car came barreling down the alley in reverse, nearly plowing into the cruiser, and I was told very sternly to leave immediately. I ran home and pulled up a police scanner feed to try and glean some information. They were calling for a gang officer, a domestic violence unit, Vice Squad, CSI. So my gut feeling wasn't too far off the mark. Later that night, the officer called me asking to send the entirety of my footage. I asked if there was anything he could divulge about what happened. I can't tell you much, but this was a bad dude and he's going away. We towed the car as evidence, but we'll have to wait until morning to get a big enough truck to move the RV. To say I slept well that night was an understatement, But that calm was shattered quite literally early the next morning as I heard glass breaking outside. 3 masked men were breaking into the RV with crowbars. One was up on a ladder sawing through the roof with an angle grinder. I frantically called 911, struggling to explain the context of what was going on. Once again met with a verbal eye roll from the call taker. "Is it your RV? No? Sir, you can't report a stolen vehicle that isn't yours." I hung up and tried again, hoping to get someone else on the other end. "We have a record dispatched to that location. Are you sure these aren't the tow operators?" Sure enough, just as these guys managed to get the RV started, the tow truck was coming around the corner. They booked it so fast it ripped up the gravel. And it's a miracle it didn't end up through someone's wall. Well, whatever the absolute fucking hell happened is seemingly over. Seemingly. Again, seemingly. I suppose this is an epilogue of sorts, and by far the most unsettling part of this story. I quickly upgraded my chintzy camera to a couple commercial-grade ones, with smart object detection, synchronized floodlights, and automatic sirens, hoping I'd rest easy. No, it was going off all the time. At least once or twice a week for over a month, the cameras caught creeps skulking around my backyard and windows with flashlights. Plenty of other times cars idling with the lights off in the alley for unsettlingly long periods. The one I couldn't shake was the guy at 3 a.m. slowly making his way up the alley in a low crouch, taking a long pause directly behind my house, and then booking it towards my door full of steam. Or the guy that managed to get past the camera, and I came face to face with his ugly mug pressed up against my kitchen window at midnight. At least the alarms did their job. Every one of these guys took off once lit up like a stadium with sirens blaring. For some comic relief, that last guy tried to hop a retaining wall and faceplanted on the other side. Of course, again, friends and family had some not-so-reassuring platitudes. Maybe it was someone looking for a lost dog, or someone got lost in the alley, or maybe this just always happened before I had lights and cameras. And shaking what little faith I had in law enforcement, the cops, if they showed up at all, were at least an hour late. But here's the kicker. I filed a public request for the arrest and case report and got it back months later. Turns out my neighbor in the RV had kidnapped his ex-girlfriend and was likely trafficking her. She'd in fact called 911 but didn't know the neighborhood, and the cops were looking for them in a different part of town. He had a lengthy rap sheet for felony burglary, fraud, and firearms charges. An acquaintance of his was interviewed by detectives and said the RV was packed to the gills with guns and improvised weapons. And this guy told this witness that he would come back and kill whoever sent him back to jail. And right at the bottom, in all caps, was my name and address, but phone number redacted, listed as reporting party/so MPLAINTANT. The cops searched the sports car and found nothing of note. The RV, as you recall, was apparently stolen before they could even get a valid warrant. The ex fled during the arrest, as I saw on camera, and was never heard from again. The DA dropped the case and this guy was released from jail 48 hours later. It's been about 6 months since my last visitor at night. There hasn't been a whole lot of peace of mind before I turn in for the night. It's slowly fading, but I can't say I'm not a little on edge after dark, even in my own home. My house is now completely lit 360 degrees. I've put various dents and or spiky plantings around my windows and the perimeter, and I sleep with a rifle next to my bed. But fortunately new folks have moved into the vacant houses on either side of me, and they're also good people. I just don't know if I have the heart to tell them all what went down. Story 10. Break-in while pet-sitting. Just posted about my lovely birthday and thought I'd unload another that happened the next week. Honestly, just writing it all out feels better than squashing it. I took on a house/pet sitting job for the weekend after my birthday. It was for a friend, and the dogs and cat are all super sweet and I was happy to do it. I was already reeling from a scary encounter on my birthday, so it was welcome respite to have a mini vacation where I had a house to myself. It was the first night there. I'd come back from a family member's birthday party, and it was too early to curl my hair, so I was watching Ginny and Georgia on the living room TV. For reference, the TV was next to the front door, with the guest bathroom I was using within 3 foot. It was about 10 p.m., and I paused the show to pee. Dogs were asleep on the other side of the house, both older, and one with mobility issues, and shortly after locking the door and sitting down, I heard something. At first I thought I was being paranoid, as I've been through several break-ins and attempts, but then I heard the door open and footsteps on the laminate flooring, if you know how loud. Then I heard a man's cough distinctly, maybe 15 feet from where I was. I frantically texted my mom to call the cops, thinking I should be as quiet as possible. But when she didn't answer and I heard his footsteps coming closer, I panicked and called myself. Keep in mind, after my first situation I became very particular. When I house site, the first thing I do is check all windows and doors, and secure all entry points, as my dad kinda taught me growing up. I know everything was locked, but I'm sobbing on the phone and panicking on a toilet seat, hoping the cops get there in time and I don't end up another statistic. Then I hear the footsteps recede, and the back door close. The operator informed me the cops were there, but I'd have to come out to let them in. I've got some really bad stories, but unlocking that door, running to the front door to unlock it and basically falling outside was up there for terrifying moments in my life. They checked the house. They didn't believe me. The back door was not particularly secure, as it's the same kind I have in my bedroom at my place. It's the kind you can turn the lock and close behind you, so of course the place was locked up. Once again I slept with a knife under my pillow, and that's for maybe 45 minutes I actually slept. To the man who barged into the house I was watching, I don't know who you are or what you wanted, but I'd like to never meet you. Story 11. The smile that haunts me. This is a story from when I was in 8th grade or around that time. Honestly, I feel a bit stupid bringing it up here, but I've never told anyone, not family, not friends, and I just want to leave it out somewhere. Up until high school, I usually went home with my friend me walking and her trotting alongside on her bike. The walk home from school was in a relatively safe area, surrounded by other schools, supermarkets, churches, and little houses, so I never felt unsafe during that 10-minute walk. Not even on that one particular day when my friend had to ride ahead, and I was left walking home alone. About halfway through my usual route, I suddenly had this unsettling feeling, like someone was watching me. I turned my head toward the street next to me and saw a car driving noticeably slower than it should have been. I actually looked it up on Google Maps out of curiosity, and the speed limit on that street was 30 km/h. But this car was moving so slowly, it looked like it was floating, like it was trying to match my pace. At first, I didn't think much of it. After all, as I mentioned, there were schools and even a kindergarten in the area. I just assumed it was a parent looking for a parking spot to pick up their kid. But things started to feel a bit creepy when the driver's window rolled down and the man behind the wheel looked directly at me. My memory of that moment has grown a bit fuzzy over time, but what I remember clearly is a man with short, dark hair and an unsettling wide smile. It's that smile that stuck in my memory the most. It didn't fade for a second. The situation was bizarre, and I couldn't fully process what was happening. So I just turned my head and looked straight ahead. But to my shock, he kept staring. That same horrifying, twisted smile plastered across his face. He continued creeping along next to me, not speeding up. Felt like an eternity. I didn't know what to do. Everything about the situation felt surreal. I looked around to see if maybe he was looking at someone else, or if anyone else noticed how creepy this was. But I remember people just walking by normally, as if nothing strange was happening. My only comfort was that people were around at all, because by that point, I was getting genuinely scared and still struggling to register what was happening. I even thought about calling out to some guy walking in front of me, but was too shy to say anything. Out of curiosity and fear, I started walking even slower. I could have sworn I saw a flicker of disappointment on his face before he finally drove away. It all felt like a nightmare. I felt relieved watching the car disappear down the road. But then, as I reached the crossroad that led to the street I lived on, he appeared again. He was back, driving just as slowly, window down. That same grotesque, unnatural smile stretched across his face. At that point, I was so stunned I froze for a moment and looked directly at him. I was trying to convince myself this was really happening and not something I was making up. Maybe he was someone I knew? A friend of my parents? An old teacher trying to say hello? But no, this was real. This man was practically twisting his entire upper body to look at me through the car window. I didn't know him. That smile was still unbearably creepy, and I had no idea what he wanted. Even worse, I realized something. From the direction he was now coming from, He must have driven in a circle around the block just to appear again on the street I was about to enter. The street where I lived. My home was only a minute away. He was still driving well below 30 kilometers per hour. Still saying nothing. Still staring. As I stood there, trying to comprehend how real and dangerous this was, I felt a wave of fear wash over me. This creep could be trying to figure out where I lived. The street was lined with houses, but there wasn't a single other person around. Just him and me. All I wanted was for this nightmare to end. It was just the way he wasn't saying anything. Just looking into my face that scared the hell out of me. Thankfully, he never stopped the car completely, he just kept creeping along slowly. Eventually, he drove past far enough that I could finally cross the street. At that point, I couldn't care about anything else. I told myself that if he came near me again, I'd scream. I ran straight home. Even while running, I could swear he was still twisting his body to keep his eyes on me. Still smiling that awful smile as he drove away. I was genuinely terrified. The incident traumatized me. I knew I hadn't imagined it. I kept checking, kept thinking about it over and over again. I was so scared he'd figured out where I lived that I refused to go to school or leave the house for days. I remained on edge for weeks, always half expecting him to show up again. I've thought about this moment so many times. Did he know me? Then why didn't he say anything? Why did he just smile like that? I even felt ashamed for wearing a skirt that day, thinking maybe he was just some creep lurking around. But no matter what, the whole situation was terrifying. Now I'm an adult, still living with my parents in the same place, though I have no reason to walk that old route anymore. I've never seen that man again, and I've never experienced anything as creepy or strange as that day. All that's been haunting me is his creepy smile and how I'll never quite understand how this horror movie story actually happened to me. I never told my parents or my friends, especially not my mom. She's always been very overprotective, and I knew if I told her, she'd probably have started walking me to school again like I was a kindergartner. And my friends back then probably wouldn't have believed me anyway. So now that I've finally gotten this off my chest. Creepy car guy, I'm glad I never saw you again, and I hope it stays that way. I just genuinely hope you never did this or something worse to any other kid. Ever. Story 12. He said I'd never see my mom again unless she took him back. I was around 9 years old when this happened. My parents had been separated for about 2 years. Before I get to the main part of the story, here's a bit of context. My mom, dad, and I were always very poor. At the time, my parents were trying to build a house in one of the most dangerous neighborhoods in our city, a place overrun by drug trafficking. But it was all they could afford. Otherwise, we'd be on the streets. The house was never finished. It had half-built rooms, piles of construction material everywhere, bare red brick walls with mold and water damage. It was crumbling, much like my parents' relationship and my childhood. My father was violent, unfaithful, and never helped with anything. Then one night, out of nowhere, I woke up to my mom shaking me awake, throwing a jacket over my shoulders, telling me we had to leave. We moved to another city and stayed with relatives for 2 years before coming back. That's when this story begins. My mom and I moved into a small place, a place my father didn't know. We later found out he had been asking around the city, trying to find out where we were. Eventually, he did. I was still very young, and despite everything, I begged my mom to let me see him. A court ended up granting him visitation rights every other weekend, and for about a year, that's what we did. By then, he had a new partner and still lived in that old, decrepit house. I spent weekends there. As awful as the place was, my younger brother also lived there, and we were close. My stepmom had a child with Dad while he was still with my mom. My brother is about 3 years younger than me. We'd play in the empty lots, using broken construction materials, rusted furniture, and bottle caps as our imaginary theme park. Company and imagination can save a child's life. My father used to tell me he was going to get my mom back. He told me not to let any man get close to her. At the time, I secretly hoped for a happy family too, even though I liked my stepmother. Truth is, he didn't even really take care of me during those visits. I mostly stayed with my brother and his partner because he was completely incapable of caring for a child. One weekend, something strange happened. It was nearly time for him to return me to my mom. But instead of following our usual routine, he suddenly ordered his girlfriend and my brother to leave the house. She started to protest, but he shouted at her until she left without another word. Then he took me down the hill. The house was on a steep hill, to a place I'd never been before. We arrived at a woman's house I didn't recognize. He introduced us, then told me I'd be staying there for a while. But first, the woman handed me a big glass of chocolate milk, my favorite. She was very nice and smiled warmly as she brought it from the kitchen. I drank it. Very quickly, I started feeling incredibly sleepy. Everything faded to black. When I opened my eyes again, I was back in my father's house. My mom was there, screaming and crying. He stood in front of her, panicking, repeating, "Don't do this. Don't do this." She scooped me up like I was still a toddler and carried me outside. It was the middle of the night. The streets were completely empty, but she didn't stop. She carried me all the way to a bus stop and we waited. Then we left. Years later, I found out what really happened. He had kidnapped me. Instead of taking me to the designated drop-off location, he brought me to another woman's house, a mistress, and drugged me. He showed up to the meeting point alone and told my mom she'd never see me again unless she agreed to get back together with him. Then he walked away. My mom completely lost it. She ran to his house screaming, but he wasn't there. So she waited at the door until he showed up. When he did, she threatened to have the local drug dealers kill him if he didn't take her to where I was, and he believed her. It was late. She was screaming loud enough for the whole neighborhood to hear, and he knew she wasn't bluffing. So he went back to the woman's house, got me, and brought me home. That's when I woke up. That's when I saw her, hysterical, terrified, and somehow still strong enough to carry me out of that hell. Dad, let's not meet ever again. Story 13. I met creepy hermits on a camping trip when I was 13. So when I was younger, around 13 or 14 years old, I was invited to go on a camping trip with my best friend Pat, his dad, and his uncles. It was this kind of guys' weekend coming-of-age thing. Something I'd like to do with my kids now. You know, fishing, cooking over fires, our first couple of beers, sleeping in tents and stuff like that. We drove pretty far up north, but many years later, being 30, I can't remember where exactly we went. I know it was about 2 hours north of where I live now. We had parked Pat Dad's truck off the side of the road in a bush and canoeing a pretty far distance down a river to a lake and set up our camp at the edge of the water. Right across the water, we could see this really old abandoned-looking cabin. On the outside, it looked abandoned. The roof was sagging and all the bushes were growing up around it. At one point, Pat's dad and his uncles were fishing and drinking and allowed us to go adventuring a bit. Surprisingly, they actually allowed us to take one of the canoes across the water to check out the abandoned cabin. In hindsight, I don't think I would let me boys now go that far where I couldn't get to them in an emergency, but they were drunk LOL, so being 13-ish-year-old boys, we did exactly that. We paddled across and checked it out. On the outside, this thing looked super decrepit. The front door was unlocked and we went inside. This was a mistake. On the inside, it was certainly not abandoned and very lived in. It really freaked us out knowing somebody lived there but was obviously nowhere nearby. There were porn magazines spread across the table, a bong, a tray full of weed, beer bottles everywhere, and on one of the shelves in the living room were 2 hunting shotguns. I know it was dumb to play with them, but we did. Never pulled the trigger, just walked around the house with them like idiots feeling cool. We checked out different rooms in the house, but one really creeped us out. Yes, I understand we technically committed a break and enter or a trespass, but we honestly thought it was abandoned before we got inside. Once we were in, we figured it was somebody's hangout or something, but it was pretty deep out in the woods. Anyways, one of the rooms had those mannequins that you see in a clothing store, but none of them were wearing any clothes and they all had wigs, different lengths and colors. Something felt really off about that, and we decided we'd had enough and left after putting the guns back where we found them. After canoeing back to our campsite, we told Pat's dad everything. He was almost as stunned as we were. That evening we fished some more, and Pat caught a fish that his dad cooked over the fire. While we were eating dinner, 2 guys came by in a motorboat and stopped at our site. They were friendly enough, we all joked around a bit, and we had assumed they were just other campers or people out fishing, people like us, but then they invited us to their cabin just across the water to hang out. Pat's dad politely declined, and then they still lingered and things just started to feel weird. The two guys were drinking quite a lot and exchanging weird looks. At one point they even asked Pat and I if just the two of us would go hang out. Pat's dad gave them a stern no, and things were even more awkward. They stayed a while until it got dark and then they left. That night, Pat's dad and uncles stayed up all night by the fire while we were to sleep in the tent. We didn't do much sleeping, mostly just talking about how creeped out we were by those two guys that lived in that cabin, and their wigs, porn, and guns. Eventually we fell asleep. In the morning, everything was packed up and Pat's dad cut the trip short. We put the tent we were in away and left immediately. Most of the trip back was spent talking about how his dad was really freaked out about those guys. Pat and I have talked about it here and there over the years, but years ago we had a major falling out. I never did ask exactly where that cabin was. I wouldn't want to go back there anyways. To the wig-wearing hermits in the cabin, please, let's not meet again. Story 14. This guy from Alcoholics Anonymous started stalking me. I am an alcoholic, and I have been sober for 9 years. That is, without a doubt, my proudest accomplishment. I started getting help during my sophomore year of high school. Looking back, I am so grateful for the timing. If I had hit rock bottom later, things would only have gotten worse. My parents actually transferred me to a different school so I could start fresh and meet new people. By the time I turned 18, a few months before graduation, I had already been sober for over 2 years. That was around the time I started aging out of most teen recovery programs. A lot of the counselors I worked with only focused on youth cases, so I had to start finding adult support groups. I grew up in Los Angeles, but not the touristy part. My neighborhood had liquor stores every few blocks and corner shops with thick plexiglass windows. Alcoholism was really common and normalized. So once the teen programs ended for me, I started going to early morning AA meetings on Tuesdays and Thursdays. They were held in a small church near my school. I did not have a first period on those days, so it worked out perfectly. After the meetings, I would usually stay for a couple extra minutes to write in my journal or just sit in silence. One morning, this guy stayed after the meeting and asked me what I was writing. I told him I was journaling. He said he liked the idea and wanted to try it himself. After that, he started sitting next to me at every meeting. We would talk a bit afterward. He seemed normal. He was about my age. He knew I was about to graduate and asked if I planned to keep coming to that group during the summer. I told him I was not sure yet. I had just gotten a job across town and was looking into meetings closer to where I would be working. I could tell he did not love that answer. Sometimes you can just see disappointment on people's faces. I used to talk a lot in those meetings. I did not go just to sit in silence. I brought energy into that room. I like to think I helped people feel a little better. I think he felt that too. And I think that is why he did not want me to leave. People have told me I talk too much, so maybe I am just flattering myself and everyone else wanted me to be quiet, but I like to think I was making a difference. He asked again when I would be switching to a different group. I said I did not know yet. I told him I planned to keep coming through the end of the school year. I do not remember if I ever told him the name of my school, but I always wore royal blue and gold. He knew I went to school nearby, just around the corner from the church. It would not have been hard to figure it out. Then, in the last 2 weeks of senior year, everything got wild. We had senior ditch day, late-night hangouts, sleepovers, goodbye parties, etc. I missed the AA meetings at the church, and then I switched AA groups altogether. At graduation, everything was great, but that guy showed up. It was so off. He did not know me like that. I had never invited him. We were not close, but there he was, smiling at me from the back like it was completely normal. He came over afterward and said he brought a gift. It was a box of chocolates and a note about how much he would miss me. He said I should drop by the meetings again sometime. I uncomfortably said something like, "Thank you." I never went back. That whole situation was too weird. I did not want to see him again. Then he showed up at my new job. I was working at the cosmetics counter at a big department store. The cosmetics department actually had its own cash register. The first time he walked by, I noticed him. Then he came back the next day. And the day after that. He never spoke or asked for help. He just wandered around near my station, looking over at me like it was no big deal. He did not even try to be subtle. Eventually, I told one of my coworkers, the type of woman who does not play. She walked right up to him and asked what he thought he was doing. She called him out in front of everybody. She said she knew exactly why he was there and that it was creepy and toxic. A few shoppers turned around to see what was going on. His face turned red and he walked away without saying anything. We told our manager afterward. The manager was glad we spoke up but reminded us to let her know right away next time. There was no next time though, since he never came back. I have not seen him since. Hopefully he got bored and moved on. I do not really care to find out what he wants. Story 15. Creepy Teacher. So, to start off, this happened approximately half a month ago. I've had this one private teacher for me and my friends for 2 years. About 6 months ago, all my friends quit because that guy started charging extra, but me and this other girl decided to stay anyway, which led to me staying after uni alone with him in class for private lessons every Thursday. So, this was, as I mentioned, halfway through June, right after the summer break, and the first Sunday I attended his class after a month. On that day when I walked in, I realized I forgot to get my books, so I set my phone and stuff down on the desk and excused myself to go and borrow one from someone. Now, my phone doesn't have a password lock, but obviously I didn't quite expect him to go through it. When I got back, I saw him on my phone. Under the desk, his back faced the entrance, so I could clearly see him transferring my nudes to his phone. And when I called out asking him to give it back, he deleted his entire contact and handed it over like nothing happened. OFC, I was too scared to confront him, so I got through the class anyway. Only when I got home did I realize that he went through my gallery, my DMS and NSFW folders. I tried to consistently skip class after that, but I couldn't because my mom would force me to attend. About 2 more classes after that incident passed as normal, except he knew that I found out the stuff he did, and tried to take my phone to go through it again, in case there were other pics. OFC, I didn't know what to do, so I said I don't have any more of those nudes. He asked me to go home and take some for him and asked explicit questions like if I would consider sucking him. I said no and left. On the way back, he kept calling me on my phone, yelling at me that I was racist because I refused him service while I talked and sent pics to white men online. He went through my DMS like I said. And yes, I do. It's more of a preference and not racism. And I guess he was bitter about it because he called my mom to say I missed class, and so she made me go in the next day because OFC. She doesn't know anything about whatever happened. I just prefer to not tell her. The next day when I went in, halfway through the class, he asked me to go get something from the next classroom, and when I did, he shut the door before I could leave, pressed me against it, squeezed my chest, and kissed me even though I kept shoving him off. And I guess I froze for a while because he kept fingering until someone knocked on the door. I left right after that. The next day he forced me some hush money, about $200, to not tell anyone about what he did, and since then there hasn't been any more advances, but I still attend his classes since my mom doesn't want to search for another tutor. If I should tell her that I'd rather quit than stay here for 2 whole years. Story 16. The Man with the Wooden Leg. Hey guys, quick thing before. I'm a French guy posting this story. I did my best to translate this real story myself, with a little help from Google Translate. Please excuse any mistakes. My name is Nolan and I'm 24 now, but when all this happened, I was just 12. I live not far from Paris, but I've loved traveling since I was a kid. For 5 summers straight from 2009 to 2013, my mom signed me up for summer camps every July. Those camps were amazing. I have traveled all over France, camping, hiking mountains, doing caving and rope courses, so many fun activities since I was young, and I loved every minute of it. Then came 2013, which turned out to be the worst year of my life and the last time I went to camp. That summer, the camp was on Île d'Aleron, an island in western France connected to the mainland by a big bridge. The island is known for being really hot in the summer, amazing local food, nice beaches, and especially a famous monument called Fort Boyard, an old prison in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean that once held criminals. The camp was set in the middle of nature. Imagine a group of small buildings arranged in an L shape. On one side was the entrance and on the other was just thick bushes leading into the forest. The buildings were divided between the kids' dorms, the laundry room, the dining hall, and the instructors' dorms. At that time in my life, I was pretty rebellious and didn't like to listen. Two of my friends, Malik and Enzo, came with me, so we were all set for a crazy time, maybe too crazy. Everything was fine during the first 6 days of camp, and we had so much fun. But on the 7th day, things started going wrong, mostly because of us. That night, we had a campfire game session, playing board games like Uno from 8 p.m. to 11 p.m. After that, the instructors announced lights out, and everyone went to their rooms. Malik, Enzo, and I shared a room, so we brushed our teeth and went to bed. About 25 to 30 minutes later, the instructors turned off all the lights. Around midnight, I came up with a terrible idea. A night walk in the forest with my two friends. Even though we were only 12 or 13 years old, we opened our window, looked around quickly, and saw that none of the instructors were awake. They were all asleep, probably too tired after the day's activities. We quietly crossed the camp courtyard, sneaking past the buildings, and entered the bushes on the far side of the site. We walked about 10 to 15 minutes into the forest. While walking, I was joking around and trying to scare my friends with creepy stories. Suddenly, we arrived at the fence of an old abandoned house. The house looked really run down and creepy, like something out of a witch's story. Being young and dumb, we decided to at least go into the garden. To our surprise, the gate was open, so we stepped inside. As soon as we started walking in the garden, we heard a huge, loud scream coming from a man with a deep, scary voice. We were so scared that, at first, we couldn't even understand what he was yelling. Then the front door of the house under the porch opened and we saw a man running towards us. We panicked, nearly crying, and instantly reopened the gate behind us. We ran as fast as we could back toward the camp. We managed to get back and woke everyone up in the middle of the night, so stressed, scared, and panicked that I was crying a lot. The instructors obviously scolded us for being reckless and dangerous, but it was clear from our faces that we weren't making it up. We told them what happened and finally went back to our rooms. I couldn't sleep at all that night and kept replaying the scene in my head. One detail stuck with me thanks to the moonlight. The man limped and had a wooden leg. But even so, he ran really fast. I don't know why, but I had a very bad feeling about the whole thing. I wish that had been the end of the story, but no. On the 9th day, the last day of camp, we were outside doing various activities when the instructor asked if we had our swimsuits ready because we were going to the pool. I said no and that I needed to go get mine from my room. So I ran alone to the dormitory, about 10 meters away. I opened my door, then closed it behind me for some reason without turning on the light. Inside the room, since we had the shutters closed, it was almost completely dark, but some little holes let in a bit of moonlight. At that moment, about 5 meters from me, I saw a tall, human-like figure standing still. I couldn't see its face, just the silhouette. I didn't understand what was happening, but I was frozen and couldn't move. What felt like an eternity, probably just 5 or 6 seconds. I suddenly turned, opened the door, and ran outside screaming that someone was in my room. I ran crying towards the center of the camp where everyone was. An instructor immediately went with some colleagues to check my room, but it was empty. Suddenly, the instructors called everyone to come to my room because they found something terrifying. On the floor was a piece of paper with the words, "I will come back tonight," written on it. I literally froze and cried twice as much as before. That night, the instructors stayed in pairs outside every door so nobody could enter any rooms. Thankfully, no one came back to my room that night. We left camp the next day, but because of those incidents, I never went back to camp after I was 13. Took me a long time to want to travel again with friends or family to places I didn't know. It wasn't until I was 19 that I dared to go on vacation again. When I told my mom about what happened, she told me I was incredibly stupid and brave at the time for my age, and that I did the right thing because whoever was in my room that night didn't mean well, especially with that note left behind. But honestly, going in the forest was so freaking stupid, like, I don't know why we went in that forest TBF. Even 12 years later, questions still haunt me. WTFFF, was that person in my room? Was it the same man who chased us in the forest? What did he want? And how did he find my room? These questions kept me awake many nights, and I had a lot of nightmares. Like I said at the start, even if I mostly laugh about it now, sometimes I still get anxious over small things. So to the man in the woods who chased us and then appeared in my room, let's not meet ever ever.